Alright, welcome to episode 3 of Unsheathed, featuring erotic furry writers Kyell Gold.
And I'm K.M. Hirosaki, back from my previous discreet, undisclosed location.
And I can confirm that today, Hirosaki-san is in fact wearing pants.
He can confirm that because I'm sitting right next to him.
I know, this is yet another configuration we're trying for the podcast to try to get these audio problems fixed.
I mean, I am sitting right next to him, but the ineluctable Kit Silver and I have also had 2 bottles of wine tonight, which I guess split between 2 people means I've had an entire bottle of wine's worth of drinking to myself, so we'll see how safely this goes.
And all I've had is about 3 Coke Zeros, so I'm pretty caffeinated right now, and you guys are drunk.
No, I'm not nearly drunk enough, and let's just say pre-lubricated is probably a good bit, because I've had about 2 hours to cool off and drink some decaf coffee, so...
Well, getting drunk is a grand tradition in writing, so you're further ahead than I am, although I will note that John Scalzi drinks Coke Zero, so...
I drink Coke Zero, too.
In at least that good company.
They serve that on Southwest flights now.
Oh, do they?
As of August 1st.
I've been very encouraged to see it coming up on various soda fountains in some fast food places.
This made me sad that I was flying Southwest on July 31st, and they started serving it on August 1st.
I don't think we're going to be on Southwest. Anyway, we are here again to answer questions and talk about writing, and I don't know if there's any androgynous robot foxes in today's episode, but we'll certainly see what we can do.
They may pop up again, or they may go down again. I'm not entirely sure which.
So thank you again for sending in your questions. We're going to read a few of them and talk about them. And our first one today comes from our friend Candrel.
He's from the UK, so I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
So it's Condrel.
Depending on where in the UK you're in.
That's true. It could be Condrel.
We're still going to get made fun of now.
Oh, yeah. But if people aren't making fun of us already, then they just haven't been trying. So Condrel writes, what bits of practice and exercise have you two used to brush up on areas of your writing that you felt needed developing? And further, did any of those exercises make it to be full-fledged stories that we, your fans, might have unknowingly stumbled across? So this kind of goes into the realm of workshops, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but generally the practice and exercise that I've used have been things like, well, I feel like I need some more practice writing descriptions, so I'm going to go write a bunch of descriptions. And when you do that, you just kind of go out and sit in a park and think, well, how would I describe that person? What are the essential details of that person that I would want to note down if I was introducing them in a story? Or if I'm in a location and I want to communicate the particulars of that location in a story, what are the critical details that I would want to put in?
Right. I mean, writing exercises by their very nature are directed toward a specific thing. Just like real life exercises, when you do a particular exercise, it's for a particular part of your body, like a particular muscle group. And I think the same is true of writing. It's like, okay, I'm going to do an exercise on descriptions, like you were just saying, or I want to do an exercise focus on dialogue. And so you need to know in advance, okay, what are you going to be practicing? What do you want to work on? And then from there, figure out, okay, how do I want to do that? I mean, there's no sort of all-around general, quote-unquote, writing exercise that's going to cover everything. Or if it is, it's going to be too vague to really be too much use other than throw words on paper.
There's a good exercise for dialogue, though, that we've used a lot, which is go out into the streets, and it's surprisingly hard to do this in some places, but just eavesdrop on people. Sit in a restaurant and listen to conversations, and bring a notebook along and write down the exact wording that people use, because you'll be surprised at how often when you try to remember what someone was saying, you put it into your own words. And if you want to get a feel for dialogue and how other people actually talk, the best thing you can do is listen to how other people actually talk and note it down word for word.
That reminds me of what you were saying about, I don't know if it was you or somebody else who you and I were both talking to about how when Quentin Tarantino writes dialogue, all of his characters sound like Quentin Tarantino. And about how the quality of dialogue, like when you put it in your own words, it ends up sounding like you. So it really helps to make sure that you're thinking, how would this person say this rather than how would I say this?
Yeah, and it works for Quentin Tarantino because his films are very stylized. So the fact that everybody sounds like Quentin Tarantino in his stylized world doesn't really matter too much because he's not trying to construct a picture of a real world. He's trying to construct a picture of a pulp comic book world.
No, and that's legitimate. It's just something to be aware of.
But
I think.
It is a legitimate critique.
Yeah, there's going to be a filter that you're going to put on everything, and that was the part of your comment I was trying to touch on, is that you're going to have your own, not personal bias, but your own personal interpretation of how things are supposed to go. And I think that it's good to be able to identify when you're doing that.
Yeah, and part of the thing to keep in mind with any of the exercises, and you can find a bunch of them online, and we'll, as we come up with them, we'll talk about them. I'm trying to think of other ones that we've done, but the thing to keep in mind most of all is when you're writing, you're trying to convey your ideas to other people, and it's possible to, especially in people that write in the genres we do, in kind of a fantasy genre, it's not really tied to reality enough so that it's possible to get lost in your head. And, you've invented this fantasy world populated by foxes and otters and androgynous robots, and they all end up sounding like you. And the fact is, even if your characters are all foxes and otters, they're still based on people. And they're going to have the quirks that people have. Otherwise, either you're going to spend way too much time inventing a society that's completely different from what we know but is still interesting, or they're just not going to sound real. So, take your inspiration from the real world, try to describe that to a reader. Just go out and say to yourself, if I was trying to describe this scene to someone who isn't here right now, how would I do it? Whether it's working on your description, whether it's working on dialogue, whether it's looking at a couple of people and imagining a story around them, if you're working on plot. Anything else?
Actually, you touched upon something there when you mentioned about how we're writing in a particular mode/genre with our own sort of presupposed fantasy worlds. And I'm thinking of the times that I've shown some of my stories to people who are not in the fandom. And when you talk about, foxes and wolves and otters, and a lot of times people would get confused because, you say he's a fox, but then you have him walking on two legs and wearing clothes. And
does he want to eat the rabbit?
And does he want to eat the rabbit? Exactly. And presupposing that these are anthropomorphic characters is just something that we tend to do. I mean, I do it, Kyell does it. If you read our stories, we almost never specifically call out the fact that we're talking about anthropomorphic animal characters. It's just sort of part and parcel of what we write. And that's I think that owes itself to two things. Is one, we know who we're writing for, and so we know who's going to be reading it, and we know that in their mind, when we say fox or otter, they're thinking two-legged fox, two-legged otter who, wear clothes, so that those clothes can therefore be taken off. But also, I think that it's not laziness, it's just sort of like shorthand, where we don't need to belabor the point, and so we don't.
Yeah, it's part of knowing your audience too.
Right.
If you know the assumptions your audience is going to make, then you don't have to write them down again in the story. And that's a fault that a lot of beginning writers do, is they try to write too much into the story. And really the trick is finding the balance between the enough detail that the person knows what's happening and not so much detail that they get bored.
Yeah, we don't need to know that he's exactly 5'9", 27 years old, and lives at 117 Main Street. I mean, that's...
And we especially don't need to know that in the first paragraph.
Exactly. Don't open your stories with mirrors. I got into this rant at Furry Fiesta, so I won't do it again. But just don't open your story with your character looking into a mirror, please.
Uh, any other exercises?
There was the one really fun one that I liked where you have somebody write what's supposed to be the last line of a story, and then you give that to someone else and have them take that as the first line of a new story.
Yeah, it's a cool exercise, but it wasn't really meant to work on a particular aspect of writing.
Oh, I think it's to work on storytelling when given a certain seed from which to build from. I think that that's not so much the mechanics of writing so much as the theory and structure of writing.
Right, storytelling more than writing.
Right.
Yeah, and that's true. And there's a lot to be said for exercises that are just, get something down on paper. Just start from something and go on and write.
And that one's certainly inspirational.
And that it certainly was. It was an interesting way of looking at things, and I actually stole that exercise for the beginning of the Out of Position sequel. So.
Oh, really?
Kind of.
See, I haven't heard that yet. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, you'll be one of the first to get to see it.
Oh yeah, go me. You can all be jealous of me now, people out there in listener land.
Okay. Well, we'll move on from that question then, and I will.
Oh, we didn't touch on the bit about actual stories that have come out
right.
of it. Not to belabor this point too much, I will say that there are stories that I have written specifically as exercises in writing. I was sort of going over in my head. And a lot of times when I write a story, I go, I want to write a story that does this. And that's more of sort of like a personal exercise in sort of craft as a writer. Not so much as I started an exercise and then turned that into a story. So that's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, and when I wrote Shadow of the Father, it was I was specifically trying to work on two things. One was I was trying to see if I could stick to a program of writing 1,000 words a day and do that for 100-some days and get a novel out of it. And I also wanted to see if I could write a book that was much more action-oriented, so there was less standing around and thinking and feeling bad about stuff, and more just action would follow from action throughout the book. And what's interesting is Sarah Palmer is doing the art for it, and we should have some art in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Oh, nice.
Actually said she was impressed with the amount of action in it, so I believe I can say that was a success. But at the same time, it wasn't an exercise that I originally intended to throw away that then turned into a story. It was a story that I was writing in a specific way to experiment and push my envelope.
So to just come back to Cadrill's original question here about exercises to brush up on areas that you specifically feel need developing is really, if you need to, just sit down and focus and just tell yourself, I'm going to write a scene and I'm going to work on this. And just see if you can just get even like a couple of pages of, it can be a vignette or a snippet. It doesn't even need to go anywhere, as long as that's what you're focusing on when you're writing it, to see if you can just sort of get into the habit of seeing, okay, how would I write this happening? Like, how would I write this if I'm going to focus on dialogue or on description or on, highlighting the more furry aspects of furry characters, that sort of thing. Just have that in mind and just write something to call that out.
And actually, if you email us, you or anyone else actually, email us with more specifics of particular aspects of your writing that you do want to improve, and ask for specific exercises in, say, dialogue or description or plot, we could probably come up with more specific exercises to use, because right now this is very vague, and it's sort of like, if there's areas that you wanted to focus on, what exercises would you use, and we're kind of casting about for all the various exercises we've done. But if anyone has specific questions about something, if you want to improve your plot, if you want to improve narrative flow, if you want to improve character descriptions, character voice, dialogue, which is separate from character voice, description, beginnings, endings. I'll go on for a whole half-hour episode about endings. go ahead and send us an email, and we will take a look at it.
It doesn't have to end with the characters getting off.
Yes.
In fact, it probably shouldn't. My characters only die sometimes.
My Heat story ended with a character getting off.
But it also started with somebody starting to get off.
Well, yeah. That was the point of the story.
So that makes it a invalid comparison.
All right. So next question. I think we beat the hell out of that one. This one comes from Atari Otter. And
we have a lot of otters writing into the show, don't we?
I think Condrel's a fox.
That's true. We have a lot of foxes and otters.
Condrel has a great icon.
He does. It's adorable.
It is. It makes me laugh every time I see it. In a nice way, not in a ha-ha way.
We're laughing with you, not at you.
So, Atari Otter writes, right now I'm trying to get a furry writing workshop on its feet for the local furs. Sadly, I'm just starting out with writing myself and have little experience in the field outside of a few college classes. Would it be possible to go over some things you both might see as do's and don'ts? And as it happens, I started this question because I'm going to be doing a workshop at Camp Farrell in Scenic, Ontario at the end of August. Membership's still open, campfarrell.org. And I recently sent out an email to people with the guidelines for how the workshop was going to proceed. So I thought I could boil those down and then let Hirosaki-san toss in his 2 cents as well.
Sure.
Since we've both been doing writing workshops for several years now. The first thing, and this is kind of a simple thing, but read every story twice. Because you read story once just to experience it as a story, and then you read it again so that you can actually critique it, so that you can look back and say, the first time I read the story, I didn't really understand what the point of this character was, and maybe this time going through it, you actually specifically look for what they're doing with that character and why it was unsatisfying to you.
I just need to say, when I first started doing workshops, I was amazed, just to myself, to see how helpful reading a story twice really was. Because if you're like, okay, I've already read this, I'm just going to be reinforcing it in my mind. And you really do catch a lot of new things on your second read-through, and your mind really does process things differently once you've already gone through it once, and once you've, sort of have like a way to reprocess what's happening. And there have been plenty of times where I've read a story once and go, okay, yeah, that really wasn't all that good. And then I've read it through it a second time and go, actually, that's actually pretty good. And I can appreciate it on a second read-through more than I could on the first time through. So that's definitely a good piece of advice to give. If you're going to be doing a workshop, try to make that a policy for the people who are going to be in it, is just try to read the stories twice.
Yeah, and I agree. I was amazed at how helpful it was. The second point is critiques must be helpful. You always hear about constructive criticism, and what that means is you should frame your criticism in terms that help the person improve the story. So, that sucks is not helpful criticism. Saying, this character doesn't seem to have anything important to do and is distracting from the story is a little more helpful, because it tells the person why you object to that character being in the story. And it allows them to see exactly what you're not understanding about the way they wrote the story.
And by extension, as the person submitting a story to a workshop, be prepared for the fact that the people reading it are probably going to tell you things they don't like, and they're going to ask you to change things, or to ask you, why did you bother doing this? In defense of writing, saying, well, I want things to happen that way, isn't necessarily a good enough response. You need to be able to justify your writing to both the story and, the characters that you're writing in it. And if you pass out a story to, a workshop of 5 people, and 4 of them say, hey, this part of the story just really didn't sit well with me, I think it should go a little different, that at that point you should probably take that to heart, that, okay, well, 80% of the people who read this took issue with it, maybe I should think about changing it.
And that's part of my third point, which was you need to keep in mind that the people here in this workshop are giving you the feedback because they want to help you become a better writer. They are not giving you feedback because they want to make fun of your writing, and you need to take the feedback in a positive way. So getting defensive is not a helpful response. Telling someone, well, clearly you didn't read the story close enough, because if you did, you would know that this character was very important for this reason. Or, I clearly put the description here in this paragraph on page 3, and you must have just missed it. Arguing with the people who are critiquing your manuscript is not good workshop
etiquette. Yeah.
Thank you.
And in that case, if something was that important and you hit it that well, then you wrote it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole point is to make the story better. So, and the reason that we're stressing this is because, like all writers, you have this sort of visceral defensive reaction to people telling you why your story is not perfect. And let me ruin the suspense for you right now. None of your stories will be perfect. If you were waiting for that to happen, you should probably try some other field.
If you want someone to tell you that your writing is perfect, send it to your mom. Unless you're writing gay porn, in which case...
Post it to FA.
Post it to FA and only send it to your mom if you know she's okay reading about animal people fucking. But yeah, and just real quickly to come around to the point that he mentions about starting a local group, and he says he doesn't have a lot of experience outside of a few college classes. That's really not an issue. I mean, as far as college goes, I took freshman English, and that was it as far as like college level courses for writing goes. Since then, I've taken workshop classes and I've participated in workshops with Kyell, as we've been talking about. But really, writing is more about practice and technique more than it is about formal training. That will help you get the things under your belt, such as like actual, mechanics and syntax. But we spent a whole 10 minutes talking about Strunk and White last episode, which really that will contain what you need for that. But yeah, don't stress out about, I'm not professionally trained. I don't think any of us are, especially in the furry fandom. I don't know anyone who would say that, I have a master's in English.
I think he was more saying he didn't have experience with workshops in terms of the college classes.
Well, he also
not so much that he didn't have experience in writing.
Well, he says, I've just started out with writing myself and have little experience outside of college classes.
Yeah.
He does say that. And if that's a concern for him or for anyone who's saying,
that's right.
I want to be a writer, but I haven't taken classes, don't worry about class. In fact, you're probably going to learn more from workshopping your stories than you are taking a college English class.
Yeah, very true. A couple of the other unofficial rules we have for our workshop is everyone needs to contribute. So not everyone needs to contribute every week or even every month, but everyone needs to contribute something. And in our case, occasionally for a period of a few months, it was basically Hirosaki-san and I bringing in stories every other week to keep the workshop people reading, but the other people were okay with that.
And Kit contributed the wine.
He did. He always does. But you really want a group that's enthusiastic, that wants to talk about writing. So even if they're not contributing, even if they're not writing stories, they're still happy to read your stories. And the two of us write enough that we have lots of stories that never made it to the workshop because there just wasn't time. But it's something that is supposed to help everyone become a better writer. And as Hirosaki-san here said, the best way to become a better writer is to practice writing. The best way to get better at writing is to write.
And if you're going to be participating in a workshop and providing critique, don't get hung up on the fact of, I don't know how to edit, I don't know how to provide constructive criticism. Once you've read a few stories with the idea of, I need to tell the writer how to make this story better, you'll catch on to the general gist of it pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Just sort of some mechanics, and you don't have to follow these specifically, but this is the way we do it. When a writer submits a story and everyone is discussing it, they discuss it without the authors involvement, although the author does sit in and listen. And then they bring the author in at the end. And usually the way we try to start is we start with with everybody saying what works about the story, because that's constructive criticism as well. If you say, your descriptions were really vivid, and I really could picture the place, or the characters felt very real to me, I love the character voice, or, I love the plot, I love the language, whatever. Tell the author what you like, because that tells them what they're doing right, and that is as constructive as what they're doing wrong.
Yeah, I don't think I K.M qualifies if we're specifically deconstructing an erotic story, because
No. But as we know now, there's a button on Yifstar to give us that feedback.
I would feel really awkward telling somebody in an in-person workshop that I came to their story. Even one of yours, I'm sorry.
And on that note, I think we have a third letter, which I will let you read.
Yeah, which is funny because this one relates to embarrassment as it pertains to erotic stories. How fitting. I accidentally created a segue. So this is from Sonata. Thank you, fellow person with Japanese handle. So he asked, when you started writing erotica, was it ever embarrassing to begin with? The first few times you wrote about blowjobs and anal and more than just a little bit of detail, how did that affect you? Were you nervous, shy, totally normal? He mentions being a bit embarrassed about his first forays into writing smut. For myself, I actually distinctly remember the very first erotic furry story I ever wrote. It has been lost to a hard drive crash, so none of you will ever read it. It was never posted anywhere. It was probably very bad. What I will say is that actually at the time I was probably more embarrassed at the fact that I was writing about furries than I was about writing gay sex, because I was new to the fandom, as it were, and admitting that I thought that two huskies double teaming a fox was hot was probably more of a impact that it being homoerotic was.
I think maybe you should try to rediscover that story.
I could probably write a lot better now. That was about, like almost 10 years ago at this point.
So my first experience, well, since I was writing under a pseudonym, it was considerably less embarrassing than if I'd been putting my real name out there. But there's always a little bit of just wondering how much people are going to read into the events in a story and how they relate to your actual life. I mean,
sorry,
I've written probably, I've got 69 stories up on Yifstar now, I think Trindane pointed out.
I know I've written over 50, so
so I've got 69 up there, although 26 of those are all the same story. But
if your count is at 69, you realize this means you can't write any more furry porn.
I'm not going to commit to that. I was actually thinking I was going to try to get another story up there before anybody noticed the number, but now I've kind of ruined that too.
We'll just post it before the podcast goes live.
Anyway, I've written so many stories now, and it's funny because the first stories I wrote, I was thinking, well, you're describing, the embarrassment comes from you're describing a sexual encounter, and you're thinking, well, people reading this are going to say, in order to be able to write about this, he must have actually done these things. Which I will dispel the rumor right now that everything I've written about, I have done.
I have never been double-teamed by two huskies, much to my own sadness.
At the same time, I will say that it is also not true that I've done none of the things that I've written about. So, because I do think that the old sort of write what you know, while is not 100% accurate, certainly, how to put this delicately, reading erotic stories written by people who have not actually obtained any specific knowledge of the acts that they are writing about, you can usually tell.
I actually was reading something online where somebody pointed out that you don't need to use lube for oral sex. And I'm like,
Wow.
if that would just be really gross.
So, really, the thing to realize, I think, is that once you've when you write the first one and you put it out there, you're sort of like, oh, everybody's going to think this is about my life, and I don't feel like exposing myself literarily to all these people, but really, it's this sounds kind of slutty, but the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and I think it's just something you have to get past. The enjoyment that I get out of writing it sort of supersedes any embarrassment.
I suppose if you're that embarrassed about people assuming that your erotic stories about stuff you've actually done, you could always like write vor or something, and then clearly that's not about real life experience.
Yeah, and you can add in details and stuff, and it's. I'm trying to think why else you'd be embarrassed, unless it's sort of, you're writing about some kind of encounter and you suddenly find out that's only the way you think it happens and everybody else is doing it a different way.
Or also, and I suppose that this is true of a lot of people if you look at places like Yifstar and FA, where if your persona is, you're like a young, purple wolf, and your first erotic story is about a young purple wolf in his first time having sex, I can see why you might be afraid that people would want to project onto you.
Yeah.
And I would not blame those people.
So I think I was a little nervous the first time, but the other thing to do is just, as you say, go on to Yifstar and look at all the stories that are out there and just realize,
I'm better than this.
I'm better than this, but also it's not like you're the only person writing erotica. So it's normal to be nervous. Just if it's something you want to do, calm down, go ahead and do it. Get the story out there, get another one out.
And also, really, a lot of people, if they're going to be going to Yifstar, are looking for erotica for erotic purposes, not to psychoanalyze the person who wrote it.
Exactly. So I don't know. I hope that answers that question.
Suck it up and deal.
Suck it up and deal. Indeed.
And to be fair, for Sonata specifically, you've written some pretty shameless stuff out there. So I'm really hoping you're not embarrassed anymore, because your stuff's actually pretty good. I have to say, and if there's any self-consciousness behind the writing, it doesn't show through in the text.
Yeah, I think it's a question of just, everyone else is doing it, so don't worry about it. Just breathe in. Breathe in and breathe out.
Breathe in, breathe out through your nose, nice and careful.
Exactly. Lie back and enjoy it. So we're, again, running up on our time. Our tech wolf is telling us. So next week I am going to be out at the Rocky Mountain Fur Con, and we're going to try to do another episode via Skype, which hopefully will not have some of the syncing issues that the second one did.
We're getting used to it.
We are. We're getting better. And thanks once again to friendly tech-savvy at-risk Panther, who's been extraordinarily helpful, and to our tech-savvy Wolf, who is trying to learn the rig and help us get set up.
Yeah, and on the subject of conventions, I am not going to be at Rocky Mountain Fur Con, but as I mentioned in our first episode, as a possibility, I am officially now confirmed that I will be at Rainforest, and I will be at Midwest Fur Fest.
Ooh.
I don't know if it's going to be in any official capacity at all, but I will be at both of those cons.
I know that they have me booked on an erotic writing panel at Rainforest, so perhaps I can drag you up for that.
Sneak me in.
Yeah.
Get me in through the back door, as we might say.
And
question mark.
I think that's a good enough note to end it on. Does saying "suck it up" count as talking about blowjobs?
Yes, I think it does.
Since it was about erotic stories.
Have we really not talked about blowjobs yet?
We did tangentially, without mentioning it, because that one story of mine in Heat was about a blowjob.
Oh, when I was making my breathing comments earlier, that's what I was talking about, it breathing in and out through your nose. I do have I'm not going to do a podcast about my blowjob breathing techniques, and now our tech-savvy wolf is really telling me to get off the air now. He's the one who poured me the wine. He's to blame.
Well, all right. Signing off from episode 3, a highly caffeinated Kyell Gold.
And a only slightly inebriated K.M. Hirosaki, wishing you the fondest.